A lot of people still think money moves on a single network, like a train on a track. But institutions don't move money that way. They route liquidity across multiple rails. And if you're watching the wrong rail, you're misunderstanding where settlement, risk, and control are actually shifting. That's why headlines about stablecoins, interoperability, or new settlement networks feel disconnected. They're all describing pieces of the same system, a routing layer that decides how value actually moves. This video is about that routing layer and why understanding it changes how you see XRP, Interledger, and stable dollars entirely. Here's the shift hiding in plain sight. The conversation is moving away from which chain wins and toward which rails can carry real settlement. That's not a crypto story. That's a financial infrastructure story. It also explains why headlines feel so disjointed. Retail narratives treat value transfer like a feature a network offers. Institutions treat it like a routing problem. They don't ask whether a chain can send a payment. They ask whether a flow can clear in size, under compliance constraints, with predictable settlement and durable liquidity. That's why the news cycle feels chaotic. Stablecoins, interoperability, tokenization, new settlement networks. The system underneath isn't a single thing, it's a stack. So in this episode, we're going to build that stack at a high level. We'll map how institutional flows move across the XRP Ledger, Interledger Protocol, and stable dollar corridors. And by the end, you'll be able to hear new rails and immediately understand whether the route is real and where the risk sits. Everything here is for educational and entertainment purposes only, not financial advice. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions. If clear, no hype crypto education helps you make sense of all this. Hit like and subscribe. It tells YouTube this series is worth showing to other newcomers, and it helps me keep building it for you. The core idea is simple. In modern settlement, the route matters more than the network. Institutions operate across three rails at once. First is settlement finality. That's where balances change and transactions are done. The XRP Ledger matters here because it was designed around deterministic settlement and predictable execution. For institutions, predictability isn't optional, it's safety. Second is cross-network delivery. Real finance doesn't live on one ledger. Banks run internal systems. Payment providers run their own rails. Tokenized assets may settle on one network, while cash-like instruments settle on another. Interledger Protocol exists for this reality. It routes value between independent systems without forcing them to merge. Third is the unit being routed. Stable dollars changed everything because they make multi-rail settlement practical. When the unit is stable, routing decisions can focus on liquidity quality, compliance, and delivery certainty instead of price volatility. That's the stack. Now let's zoom in just enough to make routing tangible. Inside the XRP Ledger, routing isn't theoretical. Payments find paths through available liquidity. At a high level, the ledger can complete payments across assets by selecting workable routes through order books, liquidity pools, and trust line relationships. You don't need the math to get the point. The ledger can choose a path that completes the payment and settle it deterministically. Institutions care because execution quality is operational risk. Slippage, capacity, and finality all matter. But this only solves routing inside one ledger. Institutions don't live in one ledger. A treasury flow may start in bank money, move into a stable dollar leg, and exit through a payout rail. A market maker may source liquidity in one venue and settle in another. That's where routing between systems becomes the real challenge. Interledger Protocol tackles that challenge by treating value like internet traffic. Value is packetized, routed across independent systems, and delivered through connectors that sit between ledgers. Those connectors don't require networks to share consensus or assets. They just move value across boundaries. This matters because Institutions don't want a single settlement monopoly. They want optionality, routes that can adapt when conditions change. It also changes failure behavior. Instead of pushing one large transfer and hoping it clears, packetized delivery can adapt to constraints and recover without collapsing the entire flow. But connectors introduce economics. If someone forwards value, they price risk. They care about liquidity cost, failure probability, and whether the route is even allowed under compliance rules. At this point, routing stops being ideology and becomes incentives. Stable dollars are often discussed like a product. In routing terms, they're infrastructure. When the unit being routed is stable, liquidity depth becomes easier to assess. Slippage becomes more predictable. Reconciliation simplifies. Compliance gating becomes enforceable because exposure isn't shifting during transfer. This is why stablecoin rails, as a generic phrase, misses the point. Institutions don't route abstractions. They route specific instruments with defined issuers, legal structures, and redemption models. Ripple's regulated stablecoin fits here because it functions as a settlement leg inside a broader institutional stack. You can call it RLUSD for clarity. But what matters is the role it plays. A stable dollar instrument designed for routed settlement across multiple rails. And here's the key insight. Stable dollars don't eliminate routing. They increase the need for it. Once stable value can move across networks, the question becomes which route clears most efficiently under real-world constraints. Route selection sounds technical, but in institutional finance, it's governance. Sometimes the route is dictated by treasury policy, sometimes by a payments provider optimizing cost and delivery, sometimes by a liquidity provider optimizing execution, sometimes by connectors pricing each hop in real time. In practice, route choice is shaped by three forces. Liquidity depth, real liquidity that holds up its size. Compliance gating, institutions route through systems that can prove who is allowed to transact and under what rules. Settlement certainty, predictable finality, and controllable failure modes. This is also why claims about replacing SWIFT usually miss the point. SWIFT is a messaging layer. Routing is about where liquidity actually moves, clears, and settles. Once you see that, the risk picture becomes clearer. Most people assume the risk is on the chain. In reality, it concentrates at the interfaces. Custody and control is one. If assets can't be controlled with policy and auditability, the rail won't scale. Liquidity sources are another. Routes fail when liquidity is thin, fragmented, or incentive fragile. The connector layer is another. Whoever delivers value absorbs operational and credit risk. And compliance itself is an interface. Routes are often determined by what is allowed, not what is technically possible. That's why the new Rails story isn't about speed. It's about operating under constraints and still delivering reliable settlement. So here's the contrast we started with. People talk as if money moves on a chain, and the only question is which one. Institutions route liquidity across rails, and the real question is which routes can deliver settlement at scale, under compliance, with predictable execution. The XRP Ledger matters because it offers deterministic settlement and real liquidity mechanics. Interledger matters because it connects independent systems without forcing convergence. Regulated stable dollars matter because they provide a stable unit that makes multi-rail routing operational. If you want to understand where global finance is going, watch what gets routed, not what gets marketed. Watch how liquidity is sourced, how compliance is enforced, and how settlement risk is handled. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next deep dive. This channel is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and is not financial advice. Always do your own research and keep the discussion respectful. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing, leaving a comment, or sharing it with a friend.